Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session where I managed to get 2 acronyms in the title. Yay, right? So, when you run your applications in the cloud, there's a couple of ways you can do it. The main ways is to either just happy-go-lucky and do stuff, and that can be really, really fun. And there's also then the other path, and that is to try to figure out how to do it really well. Both of them are very valid. I'm not saying one is better than the other, and they're quite enjoyable, both of them. And I'm here to talk to you today about specifically figuring out, understanding what the platform is about. So let's talk about you first. Are you all using Azure? Everyone using Azure? Yeah, right. So you have Azure subscriptions. One hand up for everyone who has anything in Azure in production. That's a lot of you, right? And so I've seen, hopefully you'll learn something good in this session. That's the plan, that's the goal, that's what I'm here for. I've seen, people who have been on Azure since many years, and they still have done very little of this, right? Little of the stuff that's in my talk. So everyone is in good company, no problem there. I'm, of course, Magnus Mårtensson. I run my own company, LoftySoft. I'm a consultant with Azure and stuff. I was the first person to become an Azure MVP in the Nordic countries. So I've been here for a long time, and that's my job is to help people get on Azure and be productive and do good things. That's what I do. If you have any reason to contact me at all, don't hesitate, shoot me an email, tweet something nice on Twitter right now, because I have really, really bad self-esteem, so, boost me up. I'm just kidding. I would be amiss if I didn't mention the Global Azure Bootcamp, because it's one of those community things that I love and I'm passionate about. 250 locations was the last Global Azure Bootcamp. It was the 5th in order, and it's all over the world. It's one specific day. There's going to be a new one sometime next year in the spring. It's massive. It's just a day of community fun around the world. End to end, the event is like 30 hours, right? It starts in New Zealand time zone in the morning, and it ends when the people over in, actually Hawaii is not on the map, but it ends when Hawaii goes to the beach, right? So basically, that's the event. It's cool. Oh, so about 10 years ago, Microsoft created their cloud platform, right? And I think many of you have seen this slide or a similar slide. This is not entirely up to date. I keep bumping up the number of regions there. It's 40 now, right? Not all of them in production, but 40 regions around the world. The most recent addition was Africa, which is cool. Finally, cloud provider in Africa. But this, right? When people see this, they go, whoa, that's a lot. And there's more than this, right? There's so many things in the platform. How do we handle it all? What do we do? How do we wrap our head around this and be effective in this? How do we even know which pieces to use? But before you start thinking about how to use these specific services to build your dream solution and make a gazillion dollars or what have you, before that, understanding what the platform is about, how it ticks, how it's really, really wired up, can help you a lot. Because there are all these concerns that you will run into. How do we handle these things, deployments and monitoring and billing and access control and more? How do we do that in a good way? I've seen so many customer cases where I'm called in to help them sort of see, the forest. There's lots of trees in the way, right? I'll come back to that analogy actually later, but it's difficult to handle this beast. They see their Azure consumption bill going up, and they don't understand anymore what's going on. So Azure, quite recently, it's been around for a while, created this new deployment model called the Azure Resource Manager. You are aware that they moved from another model previously in the blue portal, which is now called the classic portal, right? So the old portal, the classic blue portal, had one model underneath called Azure Service Management, ASM. And then Microsoft moved over to a new model called ARM, Resource Management instead. And that's the thing that underpins the portal that we use today. So what they did was they required every service that wanted to be exposed in the platform to implement this provider contract. And that way, it's extensible to infinity, right? You can add more and more services. Just remember, maybe some of you have, I'm sure, have used the old classic portal, and this scrolling list on the left-hand side kept getting longer and longer, and it was just cumbersome. It didn't really work. That older model was about handling one resource at a time. This new model is about handling many resources together. And from the other end of things, from your end of things, there are lots of different tools that you can use to take advantage of this provider contract. And in between, it exposes a RESTful API that you can talk to. We're going to look at that as well. So what do you do with the resource manager? Again, you deploy stuff. And you can deploy your resources quickly and in one go. You can organize, or it helps you organize your resources into groupings that make sense to you, so that you know that that group of resources over there, that's that app, and maybe that's over there, that's the testing environment. So that helps you with that. And it also helps you with access control. There's role-based access control involved here that got implemented at the same time of the resource management model. So it all kind of starts with the resource groups. A resource group is an empty bucket. That's how I like to think of it. You have to have a bucket. For every resource, you must have a bucket. You have to say that resource goes in that bucket. Now, I'm not talking about buckets in the sense of storage buckets, a lot of AWS stuff here, but I like to think of it as a container for your stuff. And all resources must be in a container. But a resource group that you create is created in a data center. You say, I create this resource group in like West Europe or somewhere, but the resources can be anywhere. And the reason for that is that the metadata of your resource group definition has to exist in a data center somewhere. That's why you tell Azure which one. It doesn't actually matter. It could be anyone. But the resources, logically, if you have a web application deployment with multiple regions, well, then all those resources may be in different regions around the world. So it's just some way for you to organize. And there's not multiple levels or anything. There's one level. There's like subscription, bucket, your stuff. So let's go and, I've been talking for a while. Let's go and look at a template. Because resource groups and templates, Azure Resource Management templates is what it's all about. And here is the sort of the simplest possible template. It's actually a null template. It doesn't do anything. It's empty. But it shows you that what the sort of the headlines, the headings of resource groups are. They're not more than these. There's parameters, variables, resources, and some output. So input, output, and your stuff in between. It's actually not more difficult than that. So we're going to run this template, but I want to also show you this second template. I wanted to create the simplest template. It doesn't have any input. It doesn't have any output. But it has one resource. It specifies one resource. And can you tell me what resource that is? Anyone?
Storage account.
It's a storage account, correct. It says right there. It's a Microsoft.storage/storage account. That's the type of it. It has a name and such and a location, and it specifies. So a template is a string of JSON, if you will, right? It's just a definition. Let's go to execute this thing. And I'm doing that from PowerShell in this case. First, I need to create my empty bucket. And I'll do that by saying new resource group. When I do that, if we go up to the portal here, here's Azure, and I click on resource groups. Actually, I didn't show you that it was empty first. See, hopefully we got internet and stuff. It's slow, but it's going to work. Yeah, so it's loading up. It's really slow. And that's fine. Conference Wi-Fi. Wow, that's horribly slow. And there's nothing there. Hang on. There is. Don't worry. Elevator music. Thank you for that. There it is. So there's my resource group, my arm for the win resource group that I just created from the command line, right? My empty bucket, and it's entirely empty. So if I run this template that we had, the null template that I showed you, if I run that, what's going to happen, you think? So I'm submitting my template, the empty template, to Azure, and it's validating it, and it's checking, let's go and execute this thing. It's a valid template. Cool, let's execute it. It's done. So it doesn't do anything, right? It's a valid template, but it's empty. So instead, I'm going to show off my mad PowerShell skills by selecting from that line, which means that I can skip to the other template, right? And let's run that. And here we go. So it's executing now the other template with one resource group, the one that had one storage account in it. And it's going to take a few seconds for Azure to actually provision my storage account. So this thing, the verbose thing, outputs all the blue stuff. So we can see, and it comes back and it pings and it pings. If you don't do dash verbose, you're going to just wait until it's done. At least now you get some pretty blue text. So there, resource storage created. This asset is unavailable. Jesus. We'll see if I have to hook up to maybe the wired. I didn't actually know that there was wired access. Let's see if I can just. It works. It's fine. So there it is. There's the resource that we defined. Right? And there's one more thing that I'd like to call out here early, and it's the mode. It says mode incremental. There are two modes. Incremental is default. And that means that whatever I have in my whatever I have in my template, go ahead and add that to my resource group. And you can only execute a template against one resource group at a time. And the other mode is complete. Complete means all the stuff that I have in my template, that's the stuff that's going to be in my resource group. And please remove everything else that is also in that group. So be careful with that. You might inadvertently delete stuff if you go with complete mode. But sometimes that's what you want. You want to have your template be the only source of truth for the resource group. Okay. Questions, thoughts? Yes?
Well, does the complete mode remove web application extensions also?
Yes, the complete mode will be the truth. So if you have a web application deployed with an extension and you deploy a template with complete mode without that extension, I'm pretty sure it's going to go ahead and remove those, because all those extensions and things, they are resources. So they will be killed off. So yeah, be careful and know what you're doing when you're doing that. So templates are declarative. You can read them, and you can, even if you've never seen a template before, you can read through it and figure out what it contains. If you run them, if you rerun a template, if I go and do this again, I can do this all day. It's going to go and validate my template, and it's going to go and see, hey, let's deploy these resources. Oh, there's a storage account. That storage account already exists. So I guess we're done. Right? So it's idempotent. You can fire this off any number of times. It's not going to do anything the subsequent times, right? So that's exactly to your point. If you make, yes?
Does that include the complete?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's going to, it's kind of like, you can think of it like, what's that thing you do for servers? Desired state configuration. It's kind of like that, but for resources. So whatever you tell it to do, it'll do it. If you do it again, nothing happens. It's already done. So you can do it all day. And it's easy to deploy now multiple services to multiple regions. I just had one. And again, my samples in this presentation, they will be simple because it's intended to be simple. So you have resource groups and you have your resources. Which is better here? Here's a web application that's a server with a database on it, and there's a storage account. Do I deploy them to one resource group because they're one application, or do I deploy them to separate resource groups? Which is better? What do you think? One? And it depends. So do they have the same life cycle? Maybe. But not necessarily. It depends on your logic. So again, yes, I had to put it depends on a slide, right? We hate that, but it's true. You decide. If you have multiple different applications maybe accessing the same database, it's highly likely that the database is something you want to keep for a very long time. The web application may come and go, right? But the database is probably data you want to keep. So in that case, there's a case to be had for actually putting them in separate resource groups. And also if you add access control to the mix, maybe you want a DBA to access the database, but the DBA shouldn't access the web application, you know? So all of those environments, I mean, how many environments do you have? Which ones do you have? Development? What do you have? Test? And you have 6, 7, right? Right, so you can have multiple test environments, of course. Load test environment, manual test environment. You can have productions in multiple regions. Maybe you have separate resource groups for that. At least you have lots of different environments for your stuff, right? You have many. And, you know, fair question is, do I need to have a template for each of my environments? It kind of feels a little bit redundant. And of course, you don't have to have that. You usually have one template for your environment, and then you pair that up with parameter files. So it looks like this. Here's my other template, which is just a little bit more complicated. It's still simple. It has a few parameters. So it has a website name, a SKU name, which is the name of the size of my web application. It can be from free to a premium tier. You have to choose one. And then there's a SKU capacity, which is how many instances of my web application should I have. So down below in the resources section, I have, and this is a little bit funny actually, I have here a web, the type of this resource is Microsoft.web/server farms. And that's weird. Do they have server farms in Azure, really? Yeah, it's the thing that they in the portal call the app service plan, right? Now, every tech guy knew what a server farm was, and I bet the tech people said, yeah, so this resource is called a server farm, and then some marketing person was like, farm? Farm? Or what are we, peasants? No, we can't have it called farm, so let's think of another name, so we'll go with app service plan because that's so much better. And then tech guys would go like, what's an app service plan? You know, I know what a server farm is, right? And the same, so I have that specified here. You see that there's a little function there calling to my resource group and getting the location. So I'm intending to deploy my server farm to the same location that I specified for my resource group in this case. And then the second, so the thing is that every web application in Azure must belong to a server farm or an app service plan. So you have to have both of these resources here. And the second resource, as you can see, is a Microsoft.web/sites. And the same thing there, right? So we have websites in Azure, and then somebody said, no, we're calling everything an app now. Site is, you know, the 80s. The new name is app. So it's web apps in Azure, right? But underneath the covers, the resource is a site. So, you know, server farms and sites, that's what we have, but we're calling them apps. And you can see here that this resource depends on the farm resource. So when Azure sees this, when the resource manager sees this template, it's going to figure out that, hey, I need to deploy this server farm first and then the site. That's what it's going to do, or maybe not deploy is the name, maybe provision is the name. So in my parameters then, I have a parameter file here for my development environment. It has a name, and it has a tag to it, actually. We'll talk more about tags later. But this is going to go with the default SKU, which is free tier, and it's going to go with the default number, which is 1. So I'm going to get 1 free instance when I run this template. My test environment is a slightly larger machine. It's the B1 tier, but other than that, I have 1 instance, so the testers can do their thing. And then I have the production environment. It runs on the S1 tier, so it's a standard size tier, and it has 2 instances. So what I want to do now, of course, is define here in my, PowerShell script, I want to define these 3 environments. And I'll point to each of the parameter files. I have a nice script block here, which will, because each script block will run in its own process. I have to log into Azure, select this intended subscription, create a resource group if it's not there, and then do my deployment. And then I for each over that, and I do a start job in the background, one for each. So if I run get job now, there's nothing. There's no job in the background. For those of you who didn't know, you can run things on the background thread in PowerShell. So I'll fire this off, and it starts 3 background jobs. It's now running that little script block for each of my environments, each with a separate parameter file. So this is actually in parallel running 3 deployments on Azure. Right? Since it's in the background, I can still do stuff here in my environment. And I can see if I refresh here, it comes back and it says, yep, you got 3 deployments running here, or 3 script sections running. If I go up to Azure, hopefully it should have already, yeah, so the new resource groups are there and deployments are happening to them. So you can do this and think about scenarios such as continuous deployment, maybe continuous testing, why not? I've seen a lot of cases now where people are starting to build scenarios where they run a test suite after each build, right? So they build the code, they run a template to deploy an environment to Azure, they run the deployment to that environment, and now they have their application in the cloud, and then they run a load test automatically on that environment, and then they go and delete the environment again. So just run you only pay for the environment in Azure while you're running the load test. And after the load test is done, the environment is gone. It's pretty efficient. And many people are not at a point where they can do that, but they really should be, right? They really should be, because it's cool. It's way cool. So let's see what we have, hopefully here. Well, if I drill down into each of these environments, you're going to see that it has indeed the number of resources and size of the resources that I specified. So here we go. That's one of my server farms, my app service plan there, and my web application, right? And so on for each of my environments. Right? Now, when you do start using ARM and those kinds of things, there are, of course, some help for you. I mean, this is Microsoft after all, so we have all the expected tools. I've shown you Visual Studio Code. Of course, there's Visual Studio and the portal. We've seen that as well. You can go and interact with the resources and use the tooling. Now, I love this picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. It's the picture that reminds us that we're human. Right? And I hate that. But it is. It's the picture. This is, of course, is an automobile, right? It's a wagon which is able to be mobile on its own without a horse, right? And that was really terrifying to some people when they started rolling down the street with no horse. It's like, oh my goodness, it's the wagon of death. It's the devil's carriage. So they kind of, on some of them, they put like a horse's head on the front of the carriage to sort of soften the blow for people, right? And some of the early designs of these had a whip holder as well, because, you know, if you don't have a whip holder, where are you going to put the whip, right? So you need that. And this sort of is the backdrop of the conversation about the fact that, again, we are human. And the cloud and templates and, you know, infrastructure as code, this JSON crap, that's kind of new to a lot of us, especially if you're not a developer, if you're an IT person. And you go like, I've never needed JSON templates before, and what do I do now? Like, I have to start using one of those tools like Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio? Are you kidding me? No, I won't do it. But you really should. And it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of power involved, right? This enables IT to be supermen, right? And women, right? Super people. Amazing stuff. Because no longer when you walk into the IT department and say, I'd like to have a database, they look up to you like, yeah, here's a form. You fill out the form, and then maybe, like, we have some new parts coming in, some new memory and RAM and stuff, and some disks. We're going to upgrade the SQL server, and that's going to be like 14 days maybe. And then I'll process your request, and then at some point you may have a database, possibly, if you ask me really nicely. right? You want a database? Sure. Click. There you go. Right? I mean, it's so vastly different. It's an entirely new proposition. You want 200 databases? No problem, right? So really, command line is, of course, the method of choice for many IT people, and we as devs, if there's dev people in the house, right, should also really use this. I've basically shown you all you need to know about Azure ARM templates from the command line. It's like create resource group, make deployment. It's like two commandlets. And of course, both PowerShell is actually now open source and on Linux, which is so weird. and Azure, the cross-platform command line interface, the Azure CLI, it's awesome, by the way. You go on the command prompt, you go AZ, and then you tell it what to do. AZ group create. You create a group in Azure. It's like, wow. Really cool. I love them both. I used PowerShell here because I wanted to do that background thread thing. But I use them both equally. It's transparent to me. Just choose one or use both. I don't care. And from code. So I've seen, this is actually a little bit difficult to read, but it's fluent at least. So you can like tack on any number of configurations you want. So you can create an application. I had this customer once, and they had their own load testing service, their own software that they ran. And their customers could go to their portal and requisition a load test and say, I'd like to have a load test, and here's the endpoint you're going to load test on, and blah, 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 this size of a load test, etc. Order, click, and then their application went and provisioned some VMs in Azure with their load testing agent on it, and just fire them all up and run them, collect all the data, and shut down and remove all the instances. So you can do it from code easily. Now, I'm going to tell you the secret about Azure. Pause for effect. The secret about Azure is that there ain't nothing going on but the rest. Okay? It's actually not that difficult. And this is a good thing to have seen and figure out. And I think you're really going to love this. If you browse to, let me zoom in on that. In case you haven't been there, if you browse to resources.azure.com, and some of this functionality is now showing up in the portal as well, but it started over here, and I still like this site. If you go to resources.azure.com, you can start drilling down into the resources you have. You see this sign-in that I have here has access to a few subscriptions. Let's go to the MVP sponsorship thing that I'm using for these demos. And here are my resource groups, right? You've seen me create them, so there they are. Let's drill into one of them. Let's go to the production environment. There's and the web resource provider has a server farm and a site there. You know, I can drill down and see the site and all the properties on my site. I can see the server farm there and the properties on that. And I can drill down and see everything. I can find, there's rudimentary documentation there. I can find how to use PowerShell to deploy this environment. And I could literally copy this out and create a template from this if I wanted to. But I can also do edits in here. It's really cool. So if I go in here and I say, hey, this server farm thing, why don't we, see if I can scroll down. Yeah, I can. Why don't we change the capacity of this farm from 2 to 8? Let's do 8 instances instead. And if I do a put request against this, I will now submit my changed environment back to the API. And if all went well, we can go back to Azure and go to my production environment there, and we can see my farm, the one that I just changed right now. We can see the farm, and we can drill down into it. And go to the scale out, which is the number of instances, and check, actually was on the previous screen as well, but 8, right? So that's the change that I just made. I went from 2 instances to 8, and I submitted it back to the API, and I said, hey, make this change, and I should just, whoops, there you go, 8. So now I have 8 instances on my web front-end tier for my production environment. I'm going to remove that later. That's actually costing me real money. Or it's costing Microsoft money in this case. But why I brought you here, why I drilled down like this, was to sort of give you the secret, right? And here's the secret. Let's focus in on the secret here. We're on the management endpoint here. So we're on management.azure.com. And then you see /subscriptions, and that's the subscription identifier. So it's not a secret or anything. It's the unique ID for this subscription, no secret. /resource groups, and then the resource group name with parameters prod is the name of my resource group. And then /providers, and then there's the provider name, Microsoft.web /server farms. And I'm trying to scroll to the right there. It's not really going all the way to the right. Let me escape this. And then the name of the website, right? The name of my application. So this whole thing you're seeing there, subscriptions, subscription name, resources, resource name, and then my resource in there. I mean, what's that remind you of? What is that? Well, it's a URL and a URI, right? It's the endpoint to which you talk if you want to do stuff with your site. That's one. And that's important. So I can do stuff like, I can say, actually, let's go to the web application and do that for fun. I can go there, and if I talk to that endpoint and I put a slash stop at the end, and I run this command, that actually will talk to the API and say, I want to stop this website right now. So I just stopped my 8 instances. They're not taking any traffic. So I can do that. I can talk to the API direct. But more importantly, what I wanted you guys to think about is that this whack that, whack this, subscription resource thing, it's like, if your subscription is the root of a tree, your resource group will be the branches, and the resources will be the leaves, right? So it's a tree. An Azure subscription is, in fact, a tree. And if you have many of them, you have a little forest going. So you all thought that the cloud was a cloud. It's not. The secret is that it's actually a forest, right? So now you know. And it's actually, there's power in that, because it's like, it's not so strange, is it? I can wrap my head around, I can understand a forest. I get that, So that's where we came back to the forest metaphor that I used earlier. Cool. So that's what it is. And again, there's tremendous power in knowing this and understanding, because all of a sudden it's very tangible, right? And it's organized. It's a tree. And I wanted to show you this. If you are new to this, and I find myself going back to this resource time and time again, it's you go to your favorite Bing and search GitHub Azure templates. You will get to that repository, and there's like a couple of hundred in there. How many? 493 contributors, and there's lots. And there's it's reasonably certain that there's a template for doing most things, right? You can create VMs, Linux, or whatever. You can create a whole SharePoint deployment, search resource. You can go here and start looking at the resources and trying to figure out what they should look like. You can even copy these, of course, and start doing your deployments based on these things. If I say find virtual machine. Let's see if I can find one. It's just one, okay. Maybe I should find Windows instead. Sorry. So find Windows. So any one of these, let's say I go and do a service bus, service bus topic. There's a button there that says deploy to Azure. And that will actually take you over to your subscription. You can actually deploy this exact template. So that's pretty cool. And you can do that with all these resources. It's a good place to get started. So any thoughts on that? Questions? So now we have the most... Yes, question over there.
How do you have concurrency? So if multiple people perform updates on your infrastructure at the same time?
Yeah, so concurrency, good question. I would say that Azure, the API will handle them, they will serialize. It will be in some order. And if people are trying to do updates at the same time, you'll get strange results. Well, nobody knows exactly what happens at the end. Yeah, but they will not run in parallel. They will run one after the other on the service side, on the management API. If you can call the API cross-platform?
Yeah, from other...
So you can call the API from anything that can reach the internet, because it's an HTTP REST-based endpoint. And Microsoft has built SDKs or JDKs or what have you for different platforms and different everything. And if you really want to, you can do your own HTTP calls, exactly like I did just now when I stopped or I changed the number of instances and stuff. I did it in the browser, of course, but of course that made an HTTP request to the RESTful API.
Yeah, but there is some authentication.
Oh yeah, authentication and stuff, all that.
Because now we did it inside the Microsoft portal.
Yeah. So yeah, you can authenticate, you will authenticate. Every Azure subscription always has an Active Directory, right? Attached to it so that you will access your resources. Actually, a good segue into access. We're going to talk about that now. But yeah, so you will authenticate, of course. Once you are authenticated, you have some kind of access and are allowed to perform certain actions on the management API. And what a great segue, actually, into role-based access control. So I thank you for that. Role-based access control was also implemented. The model before RBAC for Azure was either you had access to a subscription or you didn't, right? And everybody was a co-administrator. And I see a lot of people are still doing this today. It's completely and utterly wrong to do it that way. It's completely possible to do it, and a lot of folks are doing it because they started using Azure before RBAC existed. So I went to this customer, a bank customer, and they were like their main lead architect. He was like so proud, showing me all the resources. Here are all our 13 Azure subscriptions, and all of our, they had stuff like 168 web applications and all their stuff. And he's showing me the portal. Look at all this greatness. And all the time I'm standing there, I'm thinking, so you're signing in with a Microsoft account, not even a corporate account. You're signing in with a Microsoft account, and you don't even have two-factor authentication on this. So you are literally one password away from giving somebody root access to all your stuff. I'm like, which security audit would that ever pass? I mean, that's like it's unthinkable. So really, and I mean it in a nice, positive way, but please, you have to use this correctly. And using it correctly means that you will sign in, you can assign granular permissions to users or groups of users. There are built-in roles. You can have an owner role, a contributor role, a reader role, but you can also go and customize your roles and create custom roles. I'm not going to show that here today because of time, but you certainly could. So the general layout, this is a Microsoft slide that I copied there. Looks like Scott Guthrie up there in the middle, and he has some subscriptions. And he gives access as contributors to some of his managers. And the manager goes down and he creates resource groups. And he assigns access to the resource groups to his devs. You can see that there's if you saw, you can see that this is a dev guy here. It's very important that we sort of have our persona straight. So he has a t-shirt that says 404, so he's a dev. And then down there, you can actually grant specific access to the resources themselves. It's completely possible. I rarely do it. There are cases, but it's not very common. Most commonly, I will use sort of resource groups as my division, right? If you can see that, maybe you have a DBA, and the DBA should have access to the database resource only, not the other resources in the same resource group that may or may not be there. So you can give access down to resources, and you can give specific access. You can manage this resource, you can update it, you can make changes and stuff, but you're not allowed to delete it. There are lots of specific levels of access that you can put. And how to get to it is that you click on the little people in the portal. Everything has a little people symbol, and you click on that, and you start in the portal, and you assign. You can definitely do this from the command line as well, create access and assign access and that sort of stuff. But basically, that's how it's done. And key learnings here is that you should really, really not use Microsoft accounts anymore. You should never sign into Azure on a Microsoft account because you can sign in with your corporate accounts. So you should do that. You should always do that. And if you don't know how to rewire all of your subscriptions to point to your corporate Active Directory, I can show you. contact me afterwards if you want to know how to do this. It's not difficult. It's a one-time thing. It's, you have to there's chicken bones and voodoo and the blood of a virgin and stuff involved. But once you get it done, then you have all of your subscriptions lined up properly, and you assign access from your corporate accounts. And also we have the notion that you should be using groups. You put people in a group, a team of developers, and you assign access to the group, not the individuals. And go with least privilege. Again, developers may have read access on the production environment. They can see it, but they shouldn't really change it. That's the domain of the DevOps guy. He has access to change the production environment. The developers can see it, and they can look at the configuration of it, but they shouldn't accidentally be able to, oops, I deleted the production database. That shouldn't be possible, right? I ran my template against the wrong resource. That should not be possible. And you have to limit access because of these things. And of course, there's always the case of the disgruntled employee, right? But you give specific access, and you monitor the change. Every time you make a change in access, anytime you make a change to a resource, all of that is monitored, right? There's an audit log here. So I can quickly jump into Azure here and take a look at maybe this resource group here, and it has an activity log, and it's not a lot of activities there, but I can go in and see, so there's been website updates, there's been some deployments and stuff. There's an audit trail for anything that happens to your resources and to access for the resources. And you should monitor this. You should have alerts firing off, like if somebody you could, drill down to the specific JSON, which is part of the audit trail. And from here, you can set alerts on anything that happens. You can add activity log alerts. And that alert can go to an email alias. It can go in the US, I think, still only. It can go to a text message. And it could also go to a webhook. So from a webhook, you can do anything. So maybe you want to be alerted if the site is scaling out. Maybe that's a good thing that it's scaling out, auto-scaling, lots of traffic to the site. But maybe you want to know about that and follow up and see, why are we scaling out? Are we having so many requests to our service right now? That's cool, probably, hopefully it's great. But that might be a thing you want to be alerted by, right? So that can totally be done, and it should be done. And for access specifically, you should definitely follow up. When somebody assigns access, there should be somebody checking why. Yes?
Can you hook up adding these alerts to resource templates?
So in that, can you hook up the alerts to a resource template? So typically how you would, or you mean configure the alerts?
Yeah, just if you want to add a webhook alert.
Yeah, so you mean after the alert fires, something else happens, or you mean? When you deploy them, yeah. Yes, you can put most things in the templates and have that as part of the deployment. Probably these things too. So you can configure your alerts and stuff using the command line, and you can have a script for that. And you should have a script for that. And you should be able to verify that, yes, this environment has indeed all the alerts and stuff that we intend. Absolutely, good question. Now, there's another thing that most people don't do and don't know about. Is the fact that you can assign tags to resources. And that gives you the ability to sort of divide the bill, right? You can Am I missing a couple of slides there? This is interesting. Quick check. That's okay. So, tagging, you have, it was right. You have maybe your resources. You want to know how many resources you have and to whom do they belong. This database over there, whose database is that? Can I delete it? Is it important? Is it production? Is it testing? Who knows, right? So you can tag your resources, and it looks like this in the template. You can set, for instance, a department tag, R&D in this case. You can do whatever, right, in terms of tags, because tags are every resource, any resource, including resource groups, can have 15 key value pairs, just a string and a string, and you specify exactly those tags. And I did here for my environments, if I click on the little label icon there, it'll show up all the tags that I have. And I did this, right? I gave them some tags, my deployments that I just did, so that they have a department. It's R&D, and we're R&Ding here. And then I have an environment tag for specific resources. So if I click on one of these tags, I can go, hey, R&D, all of these resources belong to R&D. Okay, cool. Well, what's the development environment? It's those resources. And where's the production environment? It's those resources. So key value pairs, and that helps you, and those key value, those tags show up also on the bill at the end of the month, which means that you can give that to the Excel people, and they love that stuff, right? They can go and split the bill every which way and calculate how much R&D is costing and how much that production environment is costing and that sort of stuff. You can make graphs from this. And it's really, really powerful. Most people don't know about the tags and they don't use them. Again, you really should. And then there's more. There's policies that you can apply to your subscriptions. Policies lets you customize a rule, define a rule which is applied to your subscription. It's different from role-based access control. A policy is sort of on the subscription, not on the person, right? Or the identity signing in. You can apply this and enforce, such things as naming conventions, which types of instances can be deployed. I mean, developers might think it's really funny to deploy a Godzilla-sized machine because it's really powerful, and it's also super expensive. So you could actually have a corporate policy saying no Godzilla-sized machines, right? And, while it's fun, it's expensive. You can specify specific regions. Maybe you have a geo-compliance thing. We're not allowed to deploy outside of Europe or something like that. So the structure of them is this. It's a little bit of JSON again. It's if something, then either deny, audit, or append. So a couple of examples of that. If the location field of my resource is not West Europe or Northern Europe, then deny the deployment. So you're only allowed to deploy in Europe or in these two regions specifically. Here's one. If there is a tag that does not, if the tags do not contain the key cost center, deny the deployment. This is evil manager, right? The manager enforces a policy that says you shall tag or you shall not deploy, right? That's what that means. So it's evil manager. There's actually nice manager as well. And that's this version here. It's a little bit smaller text. But it says that there's, if all of the following is true, there's a tag section, and there's a tags.cost center that doesn't exist. Then append the deployment with a tag cost center and label it R&D. So that was actually, this is the nice manager version, right? It helps you because that applies the R&D cost center tag to every deployment that's made. And actually, I think that's smart to do on the R&D. Like if R&D is deploying resources over and over again and trying different things out, they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're R&Ding, right? So they should be doing that. And back in the days, in the past, you kind of divided access. Again, access was it was binary, right? Either you had no access or full access. So the way people divided environments, separated environments from each other was by having separate subscriptions. Right? And also it's easy to see because you get one bill for one subscription. You could see this is the R&D subscription and here's how much R&D costs because it says right here. Now today, today you don't have to do that. You can have one subscription for your entire enterprise so long as the number of resources. There's a finite number of resources to a subscription. But still, my point is valid. Yes.
If the developer is in the portal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if the developers use the portal and you apply the evil manager principle, thou shall have a tag, you can't use the portal anymore. Because you can't actually put tags on things in the portal when you create them. You have to first create them and then apply the tag. So effectively that very well caught exactly that. Basically you're disabling the use of the portal by using that evil manager principle there. So they have to use templates. So yeah, evil manager. So when a policy is evaluated, you can block or modify the request. An audit event is always generated, and any alert can be generated based on the events. So if somebody tries to deploy a Godzilla-sized machine, they get denied, and there's an audit trail. You know exactly who did it. You can go and check and see who deleted the database, right? There's a blame game here. But yeah, the point here is that it's very precise. Everything you ever do is going to be logged, and the policies will be evaluated as part of the deployment that you make. So typically you have maybe like a set of policies, each in its own individual little JSON file, and you execute them from the command line on your subscription, and you apply the policies. You can apply a policy on a scope, subscription, resource group, resource. You can have a policy which is subscription-wide, thou shalt tag or not deploy. You can do that. And you can also go down to like specific resource groups and say, inside of this resource group, you are not allowed to deploy virtual networks. I don't know. They could be anything. So there's lots of power there. I guess what I've been talking about here now is that you can remove human error, error-prone stuff. You can have security control. You can do things such as have really drastic cost savings. Auto-scaling, of course, is one, but here you can deploy environments, do testing, and delete environments. You can run environments, you can run these things all day long. It's really powerful. And you know that your environment is exactly what it's supposed to be. When you run the template, maybe with complete, you know that this environment is exactly the same every time I deploy it. There's not going to be a human error. There's not going to be any mistakes. And this is also good for the last line there. In fact, I don't know if you know, but you can't say that word just once. You have to say it 3 times. So it's automation, automation, automation. Right? That's very important. You have to do automation, automation, automation. Otherwise, you're spending time, your time that you should be focusing on your business, on your development efforts, on the tasks on the task board, doing manual labor. And we should never do that. It's just unheard of, really, if you think about it. If anything of the stuff that I've been talking about today is new to you, awesome. Go home and apply this immediately. And learn about this because it's worth it. You learn about it once, and then you use it forever, and it saves you time. So before I wrap up, I know, I don't know if it's obvious, I kind of like talking about this stuff. I love this. And if you have any thoughts again afterwards, you should email me and stuff. But any final questions and thoughts? Yes?
Is there some kind of resource where I can find if something is ready for ARM templates or not? Because I have a huge problem with web extensions and stuff like continuous delivery beta or something like that. I have no idea how to put it in the ARM template.
So what you can do, that's a great question. What you can do is you can go and manually deploy your environment in Azure, use the portal, use whatever means, and go and deploy and do the thing. And once you have your environment exactly like you want it, you can go and say, here's my resource group, here's my production environment. Now it's set up exactly the way we want it. And then you click on automation script, and you get a full template of the entire environment.
It doesn't really work like that.
No, I know. There are some edge cases, but I wanted to show everybody. But mostly, here's the template for this exact environment. I can copy it from here, and I can save that template, and I can customize it, and then I have the template that I need. But yes, there are some cases with I myself am struggling currently specifically with deploying the VM diagnostics extension to a scale set. There's a mess right there. And so it's not perfect. It's going to help you a lot. But if you have a specific question, do email me on that specific question, and I can help you with it. Figure out, ask the right person. I have some access into Microsoft, and I can go and put this on the correct desk. Any other questions? No? So everything I said was completely obvious, and maybe I was very clear, I don't know. Well, we still have about 5 minutes, but let me wrap up. As I started out, I said that, there are some new things you need to learn. You can be happy-go-lucky, you can be that, and you should be happy. But if you are doing things randomly and don't really have control, in some cases, I've seen a poor rate of cloud adoption in an organization. The tech people really wanted to do it, but they couldn't figure out how much things were going to cost and that sort of thing. So when they told that to the managers, the managers were asking like, how much is it going to cost us? And they didn't have the proper answers. And the managers just said, well, then we're not doing it. Right? Actually, they didn't sound so happy when they said it. They were more like a demand. We're not doing that because you don't know what it's going to cost. You can't tell me these things. Well, now you can, right? So there is no excuse for anything anymore. And invest in this, because seriously, you learn it once and then you enjoy it forever. If you really want to know more stuff, I'm also going to plug my workshop. I do have a workshop, 2 days. We go through everything in detail and we learn how to write templates and do policies and access control and that stuff. It's a really, really handy thing to do. So email me if you want to know more about that. And with that, I am done. Thank you for listening today.